Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us tonight. My name is Maureen Miller. I'm the chair of the board of Muskoka Algonquin Healthcare, and we're going to start off our meeting tonight with a land acknowledgement. We, Muskoka Algonquin Healthcare, and the members of our community acknowledge that we are situated on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe. We wish to deepen our understanding of the culture of the local Indigenous communities to develop appropriate, culturally safe healthcare services by building trust through respectful relationships that acknowledge past harms and mistakes to move forward in the spirit of truth and reconciliation based on the 7 grandfather teachings. So as I mentioned earlier, tonight's discussion, we're really excited to have you with us. And it's going to be focused on learning about a topic that is taking up a significant amount of time for us at Muskoka Algonquin Healthcare on our strategic planning. Planning for the future is incredibly important to leaving a lasting legacy that gives our future generations, our kids and our kids' kids, continued excellent healthcare in their local communities. Back in April, Premier Doug Ford announced that the provincial government approved our vision to reimagine local hospital care with 2 new hospitals in Muskoka to stage 1.3 of the ministry's capital planning process. With this approval, which you'll hear a little bit more about in a few minutes, the government has provided us with a planning grant to support the planning work ahead of us. So tonight, our team of board members, hospital foundation representatives, hospital administrators, patient experience partners, and some of our consultants are here to give you an update on the work that we're undertaking in 2023. Our agenda this evening includes a slide presentation with a hospital redevelopment update from MAHC's new president and CEO, Cheryl Harrison, followed by a description of the site selection process for the Bracebridge site by James Apollo from Urban Strategies. After the presentation, we will take your questions and try and answer as many of them as we can, and know that this is the first in a series of update meetings that we will be taking out to the community. We'll be back to talk to you again at the end of March. So stay tuned for more sessions like this as the planning progresses and we get closer to fully designing our new hospitals. So it's now my pleasure to welcome President and CEO Cheryl Harrison to lead us through the first part of the presentation. Cheryl, over to you.
Well, thank you, Maureen, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. It's been really exciting over the past week and a bit to go out into our communities across all of the catchment areas that our 2 hospital sites serve. We've done 6 in-person presentations, and then this is our second of 2 virtuals. So great that we've been able to reach so many people. Believe it or not, it's been 3 years since we have come out to our communities to engage you in future planning for a future hospital. And there's a lot for you to share with you. And more importantly, tonight is about wanting to hear your thoughts and ideas on where we are in the project. Next slide. So this project truly requires a village. Our consultant partners that you see here on the screen bring their different expertise as we plan our new hospital on 2 sites. Helping to support all of this work starts with our board, who has a robust governance structure that provides oversight, along with our hospital team members, physicians, and patient family advisors. Next slide. MAHC has been one organization with 2 hospitals since 2005. And for the last 10 years, we've been working through one development project for 2 sites. And there's been a lot of important work that has been completed in the past decade. A frequent question we hear is, so why do we really need 2 new hospitals? And the answer is clear. We have a lack of adequate space to provide healthcare to the current standards. For example, we do not have enough number of private rooms. Our emergency departments and diagnostic imaging areas are half the size to serve the current volumes of service our patients need. Our aging buildings require continued significant investment just to maintain them. And some areas of our hospital don't even meet current standards. For example, fire sprinkler systems and accessible bathrooms. The next frequent question is, so why not just renovate the existing site? And the answer is also very clear. It is highly disruptive to patient care to renovate and continue to provide service at the same time. And it is also very expensive. With the aging infrastructure that needs to be brought up to hospital building code, it would be certainly more expensive to renovate. Next slide. So our goal is to reach what's called stage 1.3 of the ministry's extensive capital planning approach. And here you see on the slide the 1.3, and as you can see, there's another number of steps after this one. We want to keep the momentum going, and as I said, we want to be able to submit this stage by September 30th of this year. Next slide. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what actually is going on in stage 1.3, and it's a lot of work that we want to share with you. There's 4 key activities. First, we need to create a functional program that needs to be influenced by our user group consultants. We need to be using data and future volumes, and we need idea generation for the future of healthcare services provided by MAHC. Functional programming focuses on answering some key questions. How will each program or service operate in the future to ensure a sustainable and affordable healthcare delivery in Muskoka District? What works well that we want to continue, including great learnings from the pandemic? What are some things we want to change? How will our programs and services integrate operationally across 2 sites and with other programs, importantly, that are delivered in our communities? The second area is our community's local share financing plan that is required, and I'm going to spend a bit of time on that shortly. We also want to confirm the site selection, or the site for South Muskoka. That is part of the submission as well, and you're going to hear from James shortly. And finally, the ministry is absolutely adamant about us being able to demonstrate evidence of broad engagement across this stage and actually across all the stages that we submit. How will we engage with our community, our providers, in influencing every stage? Next slide, please. So these are just some photos from our last stage 1 submission, where you can see that there are a variety of partners in the community, multiple different practitioners and clinicians that are at the table doing the planning, and we're really looking forward to that same type of engagement for this next stage. Next slide. Working through this stage of planning requires us to be brave and bold. We need to be innovative and think differently based on our experiences from the recent past. We owe to everyone to ensure that these learnings influence us for the future of healthcare delivery. Advancing technology to transform our services is essential. And in healthcare, technology changes at an extremely rapid pace. We have to prepare for courageous and conversations and decisions as we go through the stage. And most importantly, our success will be guided by integrating the feedback and insights from our community partners, patients, families, and our staff, physicians, and volunteers. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about local share. You've heard a lot about the cost of this project, so let me highlight what local share costs mean. The local share is the portion of the project costs that communities are responsible to cover. 10% of the eligible construction costs are to be covered by local share. The ministry covers 90%. Local share is responsible for 100% of equipment and furnishings, as well as new land, if depending on if we have to buy it or not, and if we have to do any preparation to that land. All of that is part of local share. And that share typically ranges from 23 to 30% of the total program costs. Next slide. So the ministry covers the lion's share, as I described, of the total project costs off to the left, which is about 70 to 77%. And we are relying on our foundations, our municipalities, locally and regionally, ourselves, and Muskoka Algonquin Healthcare Organization to raise that local share. It's important to note that we have to satisfy the local share requirement and commitment before we can move into the next stage. Muskoka Algonquin has a local share committee that is chaired by Maureen, our board chair. And That committee is comprised of the district chair, area mayors, and the CAOs from the area municipalities and District of Muskoka, as well as representatives from our two foundations. They are extremely motivated to come up with the plan so that we can start putting aside funds now. Next slide. I'm going to just quickly run through where we're at with the program costs and our local share. So in 2019, the project cost in 2019 dollars was 561 million. Local share at that time 129 million. Jump to September of 2022, we updated those numbers to say if we built the two new hospitals today, what would the project be? And it jumped to 722 million with a local share of 165. Going forward 5 years, and we're using 5 years as a point in time where we could be ready to go out to tender for the construction. A lot is unknown in these 5 years in terms of what will influence the cost. We do know that the ministry uses a 6% annual inflation rate for hospital projects. But with the estimates that we think we know right now, if we were to build this project at the timeline of 2027, the project cost would be 967 million with a local share of 225 million. And I just want to reinforce that these final costs are unknown. They're going to evolve as we go through the planning process, as we redefine going along and getting more definitive about what equipment we need, what space do we need. So this is the best that we know today. Next slide. The changed environment of post-pandemic cost inflation, supply chain issues, and lengthy planning processes have impacted the cost along the way and could going forward as well. The functional program planning that we'll be doing will also help us better determine the size and co-location of different services and the equipment we're going to need. Potential delays in moving this project through government approvals is also expected, and it certainly can impact the costs. Then again, just stressing that the final project cost for the two new builds is very uncertain and subject to evolve. To take you through a couple of slides to talk about where our two new sites are going to be and where we think they might be. The first one is the Huntsville site, and the existing Huntsville hospital was built in 1978. More than 40 acres of land, which is more than enough that we need in order to build a new hospital on this land. In this slide, the hospital today is shown on the left with the purple hatch marks. And the ideal development site is to the east beside the existing hospital and to the south toward Muskoka Road 3. Following the construction, the existing building would be completely removed and an at-grade parking created beside all new construction in pink on the east of the building. And the helipad will move to the west. And for those that have frequented the hospital, having at-grade parking will be certainly a benefit. Next slide. Our South Muskoka Memorial Hospital was originally built in 1964. It's had expansions in 1980s and in the late 1990s. In Bracebridge, the existing property is small. It's undersized for future needs. It's only 11 acres and is surrounded by homes and an environmentally protected ravine. All viable land options are being considered and evaluated for the new location for Bracebridge. And I'd like to turn it over to James, who will take you through the work to date on site selection. Thank you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Hi, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join us tonight. As Cheryl mentioned, my name is James DePaulo. I'm an urban planner at Urban Strategies. And along with a couple other planners on this call, we're assisting MAC to select a location or property for the new South Muskoka Hospital. As Cheryl mentioned, the existing site is too constrained to build a hospital on the existing lands. So I'll walk you through the process that we're currently going through. To start with some high-level site selection objectives, the first is to identify as many potential properties as possible. So we've already identified numerous sites through discussions with town and district staff, through our own research, and through discussions with residents at community open houses. Next is to understand the range of technical and community planning considerations that should inform the selection of a site. and then to evaluate the sites based on those criteria to determine the site that's best suited for the hospital. And then overarching all of this is making sure that we tap into all perspectives, and that all perspectives are considered, including stakeholders and the general public through meetings and sessions like this. Next slide, please. So on the topic of engagement, this is a list of stakeholders that we've met with or plan to meet with. This has included to date town and district staff, so staff in engineering and planning, emergency service providers, MAHC Patient and Family Advisory Council, MAHC staff, the Hospital Foundation, local councils, for example, as well as the Muskoka Area Indigenous Leadership Table is one that is coming up in the next month or so. So the objective here is to keep everyone informed of the capital redevelopment process and then to get their input on what's important to consider when choosing the location of a new hospital. Next slide, please. So based on our conversations with stakeholders to date, as well as with the community through open houses, we're beginning to hear some common themes. So we're still working to synthesize this feedback, and we look forward to additional feedback tonight as well as through the online survey. But as of right now, a few key themes are access being important from various perspectives. So people have mentioned proximity to Highway 11 as the main route through the district. Access by public transit was also noted, as not everyone has access to their own car. And then access by emergency service providers is, of course, critical. We also heard that the availability of municipal services is key, as upgrading and extending services is expensive. We've heard that it's important to locate a hospital where there are other kind of compatible uses nearby or where there's land for those uses. So thinking about medical services or medical offices, for example. So there's some synergies there that could be explored. And we've also heard that it's important to understand the archaeological potential of the potential sites. And then last, that the new hospital should embrace sustainability practices in terms of building services and construction materials, for example. Next slide. So moving on to our evaluation criteria, we've put together a bit of a two-step approach to evaluation, where first a long list of sites are evaluated based on what we're calling pass-fail criteria. So these are the must-haves for a new hospital, and a potential location must meet all of these to be considered further. So just to go through these real quick, the site must be large enough, of course, a minimum of 40 acres. It must be within Bracebridge's urban center boundary. This is an area within the town boundary that is considered to be sufficient to accommodate future growth, and it's serviced or is planned to be serviced. So extending this boundary is challenging. It has to have access to a provincial highway or a district road. It must have a usable shape, proportions, and topography. So a site might be 40 acres, but if it's too narrow or too steep, for example, it might be challenging or expensive to develop. It must have access or close access to municipal services. It must be available for purchase or donation. And last, it must be at least 1.5 meters above the 100-year floodplain. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, through conversations with town and district staff, as well as our own reconnaissance, we've identified 12 properties, and of these, 3 appear to meet those pass-fail criteria. Through the open houses, though, several people have come forward about potential properties that we're currently going through the process of vetting those. And it's not too late if you happen to know of someone or you yourself have a property that might qualify, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Of those sites that have been identified so far, 3 appear to meet the pass-fail criteria, as I mentioned. The first is the Fowler construction property, that's A on the map. That's the property you might be familiar with. The town has an agreement with Fowler to purchase the lands for the purpose of a hospital, conditionally. B is the Muskoka Royale lands towards the south, across the road from the brewery. And C is the Highway 118 West lands, which is just west of the big box shopping area known as Balls Flats. And I'll walk through each of these in a little bit more detail. So next slide, please. Before that, we just want to make a note about areas of archaeological potential. So this is something that we'll be reviewing all the candidate sites against provincial mapping for what's considered archaeological potential. So 2 of these sites are in areas of moderate to high potential for archaeological resources. This doesn't necessarily mean that there are archaeological resources on the site, but rather that due to the site's location in proximity to rivers or bodies of water or known trails, for example, there's a chance. So there's a process about understanding what those might be and managing those if they are in fact on site. Next slide, please. So the first site is the Fowler construction property. Just some quick facts about this site. It's 45 acres in size, with frontage along Highway 11, but no access. It does have access or potential access from Pine Street as well as Depot Drive by the Walmart there. Municipal services are at the doorstep, and then finally it's zoned business park, industrial, and special purpose commercial. So it's not zoned institutional, but given the town's agreement to potentially purchase the site for the hospital, it suggests a degree of willingness to rezone for these purposes. Next slide, please. Second site is the Muskoka Royale lands. It's 201 acres with frontage along both Ecclestone Drive and Muskoka Beach Road. This is part of a larger property of land in this area. There's a small wetland area on site, but at 201 acres, it's large enough to provide the flexibility to accommodate that and to not impact that. It's not located within an area that's identified as having archaeological potential. It has existing municipal services, and it is currently zoned institutional. Next slide, please. And last, the Highway 118 West lands, 79 acres with frontage along Highway 118 West. The land is bisected by Beaver Creek, with the larger parcel in behind and a smaller one towards the front. Currently only access from Highway 118, but there's potentially an option to take access from Salmon Avenue by the new community center, or from the south through a subdivision that's in the works. Services exist nearby, but would require extension and upgrading. And last, these lands are zoned residential currently. Next slide, please. So moving from our sites to preliminary site selection criteria, we've developed a preliminary list of criteria which fall into 3 buckets. The first, I'll go through this at a high level and then go into a bit more detail. The first is location and property. So is the site and the broader context appropriate for a major healthcare facility? Land use planning framework, does a hospital on a certain property align with provincial, regional, and local planning policy and zoning bylaws, for example? And capital and operating costs. So how does the cost of building and operating a hospital on one property compare to another? So we'll have a look at each of these categories in more detail. The location and property, I already talked a lot about access and the importance of that, both from the perspective of an individual accessing the hospital, but emergency service providers as well. The ability to accommodate other complementary uses so that a hospital isn't existing in isolation. It could be compatible healthcare uses to create a campus of care, for example, and other compatible uses that contribute to a more mixed use community, such as residential, other institutional uses, office uses, and retail. The ability to accommodate the hospital programming, parking areas, the helipad, other functions, and then the ability to accommodate future expansion or redevelopment on the site in the long term. Next slide, please. The planning policy framework. In this category, we will look at alignment with provincial, district, and local planning policy and plans that speak to a range of matters, like the appropriate uses for different parcels of land, development requirements, compatibility with surrounding uses, for example. In some cases, the planning policy framework may need to be adjusted through a rezoning, for example. So we'll assess the nature and extent of those changes and the associated risks with those required approvals. Next slide, please. And the third bucket is capital and operating costs. So looking at the associated cost of developing a hospital at each site, the land value is just one part of the equation. Other considerations include the cost of building infrastructure, so roads, water, sewer, power, communications, the cost of prepping a site, so clearing and grading land, and then environmental remediation if it's determined that there are any contamination issues, for example. Next slide, please. So just a timeline showing where we are in the process. The green dashed line shows us at this the last open house in a series of open houses. So our next steps include continuing to gather information and data and undertaking the evaluation of the sites and preparing our report. So concurrent to this, we'll continue to meet with stakeholders for their ongoing feedback and input. We are planning to return with a second series of open houses where we will present the results of the evaluation as well as our final recommendation.
Thank you for watching a recorded version of the community open houses Muskoka Algonquin Healthcare held in January 2023. If you have questions or comments to share, we invite you to access the online survey at www.mahc.ca/site selection before it closes at the end of the day on Monday, February 20th. The survey seeks feedback on the site selection criteria and allows you to pose any other questions about our hospital redevelopment project and share your comments as well. Through the survey, you can also sign up for a user group if that interests you. Over the next little while, we will be collating the various questions we received at the in-person and virtual open houses and through this feedback survey to create a comprehensive frequently asked questions on our website. You can be informed of updates like this new FAQ webpage and other redevelopment milestones as we move through this stage of planning by subscribing to our website. As you see on the screen, the link to subscribe to is www.mahc.ca/planning-for-the-future. We invite you to also stay engaged with us through our social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at our handle @MAHC Hospitals. Thanks so much.